Our guest on This is America in the World is David Ignatius. David is the award-winning journalist who writes a twice-weekly foreign affairs column for the Washington Post. He's also an associate editor at the Post, former editor of the International Herald Tribune, and worked for 10 years as a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. David is also the author of 10 novels, including Agents of Innocence, Body of Lies, which was made into a movie, and his brand new thriller is The Quantum Spy.
It's really important that a way be found to avoid a catastrophe for everyone. In the end, it would be most devastating for North Korea. As many South Koreans as would die, North Korea would be just obliterated, as I fear, as a country. Nobody wants that.
Let us start a second round here. Let's talk a little bit about the book, Quantum Spy, a thriller. It is indeed a thriller. My Lord, how do you separate fact from fiction?
Well, very carefully. A friend once said to me, David, the only time you really tell the truth is in your novels.
What did he or she mean?
Well, I think the point here was that in a 750-word newspaper column, you have to condense the truth, and then you have to put a little cap on it. It's not that you falsify it, but it's the 750-word version, and then you put a little ending in which you say, and so the way we should think about this is such and such, and often that's not faithful to how complicated things are. They don't really fit. The real world doesn't fit into 750-word bites, and it doesn't have a neat prescriptive conclusion. So if you're writing a novel and it's 100,000 words, you get to tell a truth that's more nuanced. Characters don't have to be, the good guy, the bad guy. They're complicated. I hope in this novel, which is about the U.S. and China and their spy battles that go on every day, the Chinese characters are as interesting as the Americans. Deciding who to root for in this book is complicated. You root for the hero, who's a Chinese American named Harris Chang, who works for the CIA. He's been tasked with penetrating the Chinese intelligence service and finds out that's a lot more complicated than he thought. So you root for him, but in terms of the larger story, you'd say it's complicated.
The characters that you, I can't believe how you write description. Just how you paint pictures that sink into my mind as I'm reading. It's so much different than just factual reporting or writing a think piece, huh?
It is. You need to as you and I were talking earlier, you need to let the right words fall into your head, the words that really evoke a scene or a person. You can't make yourself think of that phrase. It has to have a sort of artful inventiveness to it. And I've always been a believer that writing, when it's working, is pre-conscious. It's like dreaming. It shapes itself, and then you just have to let it go and give voice to it. And I think good description is that way. You don't just sit there thinking, oh, how do I describe that person? Just the words have to just fall into your head. So. That said, I think you have to start to feed that preconscious with a lot of reporting. You have to go to the places. I travel all over the world to report this novel. And I went and I try to observe, what does the carpet look like? What's the lighting look like? What's the feel in the air? How do you describe the smell, the humidity, and those are the details often that we bring back from a place. If we're being attentive and observant, and that I try to put in the novels.
Where does that come from in your very being, to be that attentive to detail?
It's something that, to be honest, I've had to teach myself to do. I think I'm more the kind of just the facts, ma'am, kind of reporter. But over time, I learned that the power of fiction is the ability to describe. As I said earlier, it's that broad canvas in which you can paint all the nuance that you have to force out in the quick and dirty version.
Take a little break. We're talking with David Ignatius. David is Washington Post for, what, 30 years now?
Now, more than 30 years.
More
I came
than
to the Post, it's now 32 years.
32 years.
1985.
Writing a twice weekly foreign affairs.
Well, for many of those years, I was an editor, and I rarely saw the sunlight, but I've been a columnist now for the last 10 years or so.
Wow. And before that, Wall Street Journal, we'll talk a little bit about that. And International Herald Tribune,
yes.
editor. Wow. Quantum Spy is the title of this book. As I said to David, I don't rush when I'm reading fiction, and I'm about a third of the way through. I like some of the characters, but a couple of the one character in particular, I just smell a rat someplace. Quantum Spy. It is a thriller. It says it on the cover of the book. David has written 10 novels, and we'll talk a little bit about that on the other side. This is America and the World.
This is America and the World is brought to you by the Libra Group, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, John and Mary Papajohn, the American Hellenic Institute, the U.S.-China Education Trust and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The National Hellenic Society, preserving Hellenic heritage in America. Katerina Panagopoulos. The Barakis Foundation. The League of Arab States. The Rotendaro Family Trust. And the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings.
David, so we get to know you a little bit. Born in Massachusetts, right?
Yes.
And raised pretty much in Washington, D.C.
Raised in Washington. I went to school here. I went to the same school as Al Gore. I remember Al Gore lecturing, not lecturing, but speaking to the boys in the lunch hall.
Is it St. Albans?
St. Albans School.
And tell me about your mom and dad.
I am nicest, luckiest thing in my life is that my mom and dad are still alive. My dad is 97.
Wow.
And my mom's 92.
God bless.
God bless. And we just spent Christmas with them. We had a Christmas dinner at our house that had 22 people around 3 tables. But my dad is a person I love to talk about. My dad came to Washington in 1961 to work for President Kennedy. He had served in the Pacific during World War II. He'd been on an aircraft carrier, fought in all the Navy battles, and had been interested in defense. And he was asked by President Kennedy to come to Washington as initially Assistant Secretary of the Army, and then he was Undersecretary of the Army, then he was Assistant Secretary of Defense, and he finally was Secretary of the Navy for 2 years under President Johnson. My dad just had the nicest honor that you can have, which was to have the Navy name a ship, a guided missile destroyer after him. So this spring, my family assembled in Pascagoula, Mississippi to see the launching of the USS Paul Ignatius.
Wow.
Named after my dad.
What an honor.
So it was a great honor. My dad spoke with great passion about his time in the Navy, his time in government. Chief of Naval Operations was there, and my mom was there to, I'm not saying she did it on the first swing, 92-year-old gal deserves a cup, but she cracked that bottle of champagne against the ship and gave it a proper launching. So that's, I appreciate your asking, but it's wonderful to have them still with us.
Armenian background, huh?
My dad's father was born in the Ottoman Empire, Armenian family, in what's now eastern Turkey. My dad's family were it's a kind of classic immigrant story of success and assimilation. Sadly, I don't speak Armenian, but the last couple of years I've been asked to go to Armenia, which is now an independent country, once a Soviet republic, and to be the master of ceremonies of a big kind of
Wow.
event in the Capitol. So trying to make sure that connection is alive.
And your mom has some historical background, doesn't she?
My mom, my dad is Armenian American immigrant. My mom her relatives came over on the Mayflower, and she
Woo.
can trace her lineage back. Grew up as a Congregationalist in Massachusetts, which is kind of old school. She has done so many different things in her life. She just published a memoir, which it was an account of her life and her family and the kind of things she learned as a young woman in the very traditional world of Massachusetts that she grew up in.
What do you think are the biggest lessons that they passed along to you, your dad and your mom?
Wow. I mean, I think, to give you the honest answer, the importance of family. Our families are very close. I have 2 sisters and a brother. I go see my dad at least every week. I talk to him almost every day. So our family, we really hold on tight. And I think, that's one thing that I think is part of the old world that our families come from, all of us, that we sometimes lose track of in this super fast, intense world is making sure you make time for your family. I have 3 children of my own. I have 1 granddaughter, and so I'm trying to make sure I remember the lesson from my mom and dad.
Your wife has a doctor in front of her named Dr. Eve Thunberg Ignatius?
My wife is a computer scientist.
Did she help out with the book?
She read it. She's my first reader. She works for a defense research company, and the rest I don't know because she doesn't talk about it.
Oh, that's interesting. 3 daughters, right?
Yep.
How did your wife and the girls, women, I should say, react to the whole Me Too explosion?
It was something that we all talked about. I think I heard from each of my daughters and my wife an affirmation that this is a culture in which the experience of men mistreating, harassing sometimes women is a reality. And as painful as this period of dealing with it is, that it's a good process. And I think I hear that. And I just, I have to believe that I'd love to think of a world in which my granddaughter, who's 2 years old, won't face the same kind of treatment that women, my wife's generation, my daughter's generation, have experienced. So that's Time Magazine said that was the big story of last year, even with Trump and everything else that happened. And I guess I think that's probably right.
What brought you, St. Albans, then Harvard, then King's College, Cambridge, Wall Street Journal in there, long time, 10 years with the Wall Street Journal. First on a steel beat?
Yep.
Steel.
So the best thing that happened to me, Dennis, was that I'd had this wonderful, and I have to say, elite education. I've been to St. Albans and then Harvard and then Cambridge. And the Wall Street Journal hired me and said, "We want you to cover the Steelworkers Union." Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, I know.
Mr. Prep.
Yeah. Huh? So they asked Mr. Prep to go cover the biggest industrial union in America, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me because I had to learn how to talk to people from every part of America, but big steel mill guys. I had to learn how to make sources in that union, and I just fell in love with it. I became a journalist, I think, in the moment when I learned how to get out of my skin and get into other people's, or at least learn how to talk to them. And I loved it, and I'm still in love. I fell in love with my job back then, and never lost it.
So you love news, right?
I love the process of reporting. a story I tell often, but it illustrates just how crazy I was about this job. I met my wife in Pittsburgh. She was working for a computer company. I met her at a party, and I asked her out the next weekend. Completely smitten. And I said, it's a kind of a funny date, because it's a professional wrestling match. And the reason was that my best source in the Steelworkers Union was a professional wrestler on the weekends. And I promised I'd go see him. So I took this wonderful young woman to Wheeling, West Virginia to see
a wrestling match?
Professional wrestling match with his name was Jumpin' Johnny DeFazio, who was my best source in the union.
Wow. The first book came out of a story that you did for the Wall Street Journal, huh?
My first novel was called Agents of Innocence, and it told the story of how the CIA in real life had recruited Yasser Arafat's chief of PLO intelligence as an American asset, essentially, and running for 10 years as our contact. The person who ran that operation for the agency was killed in the American embassy when it was bombed in 1983. I had written the story on the front page of the newspaper a couple months before that bombing, and then after he was killed, I began to learn so much more detail about this amazing story. I mean, think of that America was getting information from the intelligence chief of the leading terrorist group of the time, information that saved the lives, I'm told, of thousands of Americans. So I told that story in this novel, Agents of Innocence, and it took me 2 years to get the book published, but once I did, and people liked the book, I just found that telling these kinds of stories, as realistic as I can make them, was something that I loved adding to my work as a journalist.
And that was a fiction, but folks at the CIA really thought that you had done a terrific job, huh?
They knew that however much I might say it was novel, it basically was a true story.
Yeah,
and so the book got a reputation out there, and it showed me what an intelligence agency at its best does, which is to work sometimes in morally very ambiguous circumstances. I mean, this person was associated with terrorists who were very dangerous, but he was helping the United States, helping to protect Americans, and the people who did that work were incredibly skillful at it. They had a way of establishing rapport and developing relationships of trust in these very dark places overseas. And so ever since then, I've thought it's important for a strong country to have a competent intelligence service. That we love our military. We applaud the soldiers every time we go to a ballpark. But in terms of our intelligence agencies, a lot of Americans view them with great suspicion. Republicans and Democrats sometimes agree that they're bad news.
How many people work in the CIA?
Well, I think that they don't disclose the number, but it's the number who actually work overseas as operations officers is, in the I would guess in the low thousands.
And what is an operations officer? What does that mean?
An operations officer means that you're conducting intelligence operations, meaning you're stealing secrets. I mean, you're doing the work of collecting information, and then when the president decides, you're conducting covert actions, which are under our law deniable. If the president's spokesman is asked, "Did you do such and such?" You're legally allowed to say, "Nope, didn't do it." So our intelligence officers do that. There's another part of the CIA that it does analysis. It looks at the information that's been collected from every source, from all the humans who are our contacts, all the intercepts of communications, and then analyzes that information and tries to tell policymakers the truth. And I'll say one of the traditions that the CIA is proudest of is that sometimes when presidents really want to hear that something's working, like Vietnam, LBJ was desperate to hear that the Vietnam War was going to work. The CIA in the later years consistently kept saying it's not going to work. The intelligence estimates about Iraq and how things were going in Iraq were consistently pretty honest. They got it disastrously wrong before the war. We remember George Tenet's remark about slam dunk. I mean, that was a nightmare mistake. But in the later part of the Iraq War, in the Afghanistan war, the CIA has been consistently, I gather, pretty negative about how this would turn out. So, you know, in the end, that's what we want. People who will collect the secrets that are important in terms of our security, and people who will tell the truth about what's going on, so that presidents get good information.
So the president gets his information about what's going on around the world from several different sources, huh?
Well, he gets every morning the PDB, the President's Daily Brief, which is a digest of information that's collected from all the different agencies that do this. We have satellites that, take pictures. We have satellites that are big ears that listen in on conversations. The wonders of our ability to snoop on the world probably makes the rest of the world furious, but it provides American presidents with a unique set of information.
Russia did get involved heavily in our election, huh?
That's the conclusion that all of our intelligence agencies reached. Everything that I've heard from the members of Congress who are investigating this supports the conclusion that they reached. Russia meddled. It sought to help one candidate and hurt another, help Donald Trump, hurt Hillary Clinton. We're now living through this investigation to see where American law is broken in the process. But I think people should remember that the investigation that Robert Mueller is conducting begins as a counterintelligence investigation. It begins
how so?
Because it's an investigation of how the Russian intelligence agencies sought to interfere in our election. And how did it happen? Who was drawn into that? That's how it begins.
Wasn't there some kind of a hearing where someone was asked, I wish I had this right at my fingertips, someone was asked, well, what are we doing to prevent that from happening again?
That's been asked often.
And the person basically said, not much, I guess.
So sadly, that's the honest answer. It's really important that President Trump, as angry as he may be about the investigation, he thinks it's a witch hunt, we'll let the investigation finish before making our own judgments. But one thing is that we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again. I mean, look at how this process of meddling has ripped America apart. Look at how divided we are.
You say discord, divisive, dysfunctional. The society.
Sadly, I think that's our greatest vulnerability as we start the new year, is that we're just too divided as a country. People often seem like they're at each other's throats. They don't trust politicians. They're on one side or the other. And the biggest driver in what people think about every issue now is which political party they're associated with. And I think it just makes us vulnerable. If the Russians meddled, what they did was basically drive wedges into fissures, into cracks that were already there. We started this election in 2016 divided, and look at us now, a year later. I think that's no matter what you think about President Trump, surely you can agree that as a country we're too divided.
I think of sometimes of ethics, values, morals, religious upbringing, training that we've had, and a lot of people setting that aside in the service of what they say is good for the country. That bothers me a great deal.
You're right to state it that bluntly. Putting, in the end, countries like people are defined by their values.
Yes.
The character of a country, like the character of a person, is what is remembered. In the end, what matters. And America was always a country where people got that character matters, values matter.
Yeah.
I just hope we're not losing that.
Wow. David Ignatius, Washington Post, The Quantum Spy, a thriller. But what a treat to sit down and spend 2 programs with you, 2 half-hour programs. And how generous you are to sit down with me and make the time available.
That's great, Dennis. Every time I come see you, I just love being with you. Thank you so much.
For information about This Is America and the World, and to watch all of our programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, and look for us on Facebook and Twitter. You can listen to all of our ambassador interviews on our podcast, The Ambassador Series. It's available on our website and iTunes. This is America and the World is brought to you by the Libra Group, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, John and Mary Papajohn, the American Hellenic Institute, the U.S.-China Education Trust and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The National Hellenic Society, preserving Hellenic heritage in America. Katerina Panagopoulos. The Barakis Foundation. The League of Arab States. The Rotendaro Family Trust. And the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings.